I'm here today with Ministers Mendicino, Ian, Lametti and Blair and other members of our team to talk about what we're doing to protect communities. It's also important to recognize the leadership of the people joining us today who've been at the forefront of the fight for tougher gun control for years. Thank you so much for joining us. I know at the heart of your journey is often a story of grief and loss, and I thank you for everything you have done to get us to this day. Merci. 2 years ago, our government banned 1,500 models of assault-style weapons, including the Ruger Mini-14 used at Polytechnique and the AR-15. We also expanded background checks to keep firearms out of the wrong hands. We did it because it was what responsible leadership required us to do. And now, as we see gun violence continue to rise, it is our duty to keep taking action. La semaine passée, à Rivière-des-Prairies, dans l'est de Montréal, des coups de feu ont été tirés en plein jour. Il y a des balles qui ont atteint une garderie. On peut voir les trous des projectiles dans une fenêtre. Heureusement, personne n'a été blessé, mais ça aurait pu être tragique. Les victimes de violences par arme à feu, il y en a déjà eu beaucoup trop. Nothing can bring back Alfred Wong, who was caught in the crossfire of a gunfight in Vancouver when he was only 15. Nothing can bring back Miriam Boundaoui, who came to Canada from Algeria to finish high school and build the future she had dreamed about. But as a government, as a society, we have a responsibility to act to prevent more tragedies. Last summer, during the campaign, some politicians said they would make assault-style weapons legal again. Not only did we stand up to them, but we promised to go even further to protect our communities. We proposed to invest to help provinces and territories put restrictions on handguns within their jurisdictions. However, in our discussions with law enforcement, advocates, and experts, it became apparent that we needed a different solution. So we decided to take a new route, something that would tackle this issue at a national level. And so today, we're moving forward. We're introducing legislation to implement a national freeze on handgun ownership. What this means is that it will no longer be possible to buy, sell, transfer, or import handguns anywhere in Canada. In other words, we're capping the market for handguns. As a further part of this new legislation, we're also fighting gun smuggling and trafficking by increasing maximum criminal penalties and providing more tools for law enforcement to investigate firearm crimes. And we'll require the permanent alteration of long gun magazines so they can never hold more than 5 rounds. These are actions that doctors, experts, and chiefs of police have been calling for years, and we're acting on their advice. I also want to thank the advocates, many of whom are here today, for your tireless efforts. I know that for too many of you, grief and loss are at the root of the work that you do. I want to recognize that, and on behalf of all Canadians, I want to thank you for your strength. Merci. Aujourd'hui, on va de l'avant avec un projet de loi qui va faire en sorte qu'il ne sera plus possible d'acheter, de vendre, de transférer ou d'importer des armes de poing au Canada. Dans le cadre de ce nouveau projet de loi, on s'attaque aussi à l'importation illégale et au trafic d'armes à feu en augmentant les sanctions pénales maximales. Et on va fournir plus d'outils aux services policiers pour enquêter sur les crimes liés aux armes à feu. De plus, on va exiger la modification permanente des chargeurs d'armes d'épaule pour qu'ils ne puissent jamais contenir plus de 5 cartouches. Pour combattre la violence par arme à feu, il faut s'attaquer à plusieurs fronts. D'abord, avec nos mesures, on plafonne et réduit le nombre d'armes en circulation au pays. Mais il faut aussi continuer de faire de la prévention avec les jeunes qui pourraient avoir des contacts avec des milieux criminalisés. Et il faut poursuivre nos efforts pour s'attaquer à l'importation illégale à nos frontières. We've already invested to strengthen the RCMP and CBSA's capacity to intercept guns coming across our borders. We know our efforts are working because last year our agencies intercepted nearly double the number of firearms than the year before. We'll continue doing more to support law enforcement as they tackle the illegal gun market. We've thought about this long and hard. We've had many discussions within our caucus with all of our MPs who represent the diversity of our country, MPs from rural communities, MPs from urban communities. The members of our team here today can tell you that this is not an easy thing to do, but we all agree that it is the responsible thing to do. We recognize that the vast majority of gun owners use them safely and in accordance with the law. But other than using firearms for sport shooting and hunting, there is no reason anyone in Canada should need guns in their everyday lives. And Canadians certainly don't need assault-style weapons that were designed to kill the largest number of people in the shortest amount of time. Canadians are united in wanting more done to keep communities safe and prevent suicides and gender-based violence. And that's exactly why we're here today. Because the consequences are real. Today we're joined by families and friends of victims of gun violence, including the mass shootings at Polytechnique and on the Danforth and at the Quebec City Mosque. Losing a child to gun violence, or a brother, or a sister, or a spouse, or a parent, or a friend. This should never happen. Je vais être honnête, au cours des dernières années, j'ai participé à beaucoup trop de vigiles. J'ai rencontré les proches de trop de victimes. Je pense aux familles à Sainte-Foy, dévastées par cette tuerie. Je pense à ma conversation avec la famille de la gendarme Heidi Stevenson à Portapique et à plein d'autres familles de cette communauté tellement affectées par cette tragédie, ces meurtres. Les politiciens, on est toujours là pour être bons, pour compenser, pour consoler. Et c'est important de le faire, mais c'est aussi notre devoir moral d'agir. Je me souviens encore d'où j'étais quand j'ai appris la nouvelle du massacre à l'école Polytechnique. J'avais 17 ans, j'étais à quelques coins de rue de là, au cégep. On arrive dans un moment comme ça mal à saisir la profondeur et l'impact de ce qu'on est en train de vivre en tant que communauté, en tant que pays, à apprendre de telles horreurs peuvent se passer. C'est des drames qui ébranlent notre société au complet. Ça marque des générations. Canadians all agree that we need less gun violence. We cannot let the guns debate become so polarized that nothing gets done. We cannot let that happen in our country. And this is about freedom. People should be free to go to the supermarket, their school, or their place of worship without fear. These people should be free to go to the park or to a birthday party without worrying about what might happen from a stray bullet. Gun violence is a complex problem, but at the end of the day, the math is really quite simple. the fewer the guns in our communities, the safer everyone will be. I'll now pass it over to Minister Mendicino.
Bon après-midi et merci, Monsieur le Premier Ministre. And just before I begin the substance of my remarks, let me just say from the bottom of my heart, thank you to every single person who is on this stage, who has experienced indescribable pain and anguish and loss, the likes of which they would wish on no one else. And in spite of that, they have persevered with their advocacy and their leadership in a way that makes today possible. Today, our government introduced Canada's most significant action on gun violence in a generation. Aujourd'hui, notre gouvernement a présenté la mesure la plus importante prise au Canada en matière de violence armée depuis une génération. Combined with the measures we've already put in place, this marks the next significant step in our fight to eliminate gun violence. The bill we just tabled represents a milestone amidst a long and difficult battle which takes place on our streets every single day. It's a battle that has claimed too many lives, leaving empty chairs at the dinner table and empty desks in our classrooms. In recent months, I've had the privilege of meeting families from Truro and Portapique, Nova Scotia, the leaders of the Mosque City in Quebec City, women from École Polytechnique in Montreal, young people affected by the Danforth tragedy in my hometown of Toronto, and many others. I've heard them, I've grieved with them, and I'm proud that many of them are here today because they made this announcement possible. If there's one thing that you've taught me, it's the depth of your strength and spirit. If there's one thing you've shared with me, it's your plea that no one should have to endure the pain you will always carry with you. And if there's one thing I wish I could grant, it would be to bring back what was stolen from you. Nothing can undo the loss that you've suffered. But with Bill C-21, we can do everything in our power to prevent the next tragedy. Avant de souligner certaines dispositions clés de cette proposition législative, définissons clairement le défi que nous attend. Statistique Canada vient de rapporter que les homicides par arme à feu ont augmenté de 37% au cours des 11 dernières années. En 2020, les armes de poing étaient impliquées dans environ 75% des vols avec violence et 60% des homicides. Finalement, les armes de poing étaient impliquées dans plus d'un demi des infractions sexuelles et violentes commises à l'aide d'une arme à feu en 2020, ce qui confirme l'augmentation à l'armement de la violence sexiste liée à la violence armée. In short, we have before us a complex and pernicious problem, and today we're taking it head on. First, as you heard, we're introducing a national freeze on handguns. This means that individuals will be prohibited from buying, selling, importing, or transferring handguns in Canada. Some 55,000 new handguns have been registered on average every year over the last decade, a nearly 75% increase over that period. We're putting an end to that trend. And we are not waiting for this bill to pass to take action. Today, we tabled changes to regulations under the Firearms Act to bring these handgun prohibitions into force as soon as possible. Nous sommes impatients de prendre action. J'ai donc déposé de nouveaux règlements sur ce gel qui sera mis en action très rapidement et qui préviendra l'acquisition de nouveaux armes de poing. Second, this bill takes organized crime head on. If you're in the business of trafficking guns, you'll face stiffer sentences under the criminal code. If you alter a magazine or cartridge of a gun to exceed its lawful capacity, you'll face new criminal charges. And if you're involved in organized crime, you'll face new police authorities, like wiretapping, to stop gun crime before it happens. Furthermore, This spring's budget dedicates additional funds to the RCMP and CBSA so they can build on the record number of illegal guns seized at the border just last year. Et j'annoncerai sous peu le renouvellement d'initiatives fédérales de lutte contre les armes à feu et les gangs qui donnera plus de ressources aux forces policières locales. Ayant travaillé sur les lignes de front du système de justice pénale, je peux vous dire que ce gouvernement est inébranlable dans son engagement à protéger nos frontières, nos collectivités et tous les Canadiens. Third, we're addressing the increasing role that guns play in gender-based violence. The bill will prevent individuals with a prior or current restraining order from obtaining a firearms license and will empower authorities to automatically revoke the licenses of those with a new restraining order. The bill will also The bill also introduces new red flag laws, allowing courts to remove guns and suspend licenses from someone who poses a danger to themselves or anyone else. À la suite de conversations que nous avons eues avec des groupes de défense des femmes et d'autres groupes de défense, nous ajoutons des mesures pour protéger l'identité des personnes vulnérables qui s'adressent au tribunal. There is no obligation or burden on victims or survivors to use red flag laws. They will simply add another layer of protection. And just last week, I issued a new mandate letter to the Commissioner of the RCMP with specific instructions to ensure law enforcement's response to intimate partner violence is immediate, particularly when a firearm is involved. There are other provisions within Bill C-21 that address straw purchasing, replicas, and the glorification of gun violence. These are responsible, common-sense measures that all Canadians can get behind. The challenges we face in our communities are pressing, and I'm calling on all colleagues in the House of Commons and all colleagues in the Senate to pass this bill as quickly as possible. Bill C-21 builds on the action we've already taken. As you heard the Prime Minister say, 2 years ago, we banned AR-15s and other assault-style weapons under the leadership of my friend and colleague, Bill Blair. This important decision prohibited over 1,500 models of assault-style weapons. Since then, over 300 more have been added. We also committed to a mandatory buyback program to get these weapons off of our streets once and for all. And today, I can confirm the imminent launch of the initial phase of this program as we begin consultations with industry on compensation. And we intend to publish further details about the compensation system this summer. The first AR-15s and other assault-style firearms will start to be bought back by the end of this year. It's going to be hard, but we are going to get it done. However, new specifications of assault-style firearms have entered the market that are not fully captured by the terms of the ban. We recognize the need to ensure a comprehensive ban on assault firearms in the legislation, which is why our government is committed to adding this to our bill through an amendment. Il s'agit d'un projet national sans précédent, mais nous allons y arriver car nous voulons que ces armes à feu mortelles disparaissent de nos communautés pour de bon. Finally, today's announcement complements our significant work to stop gun violence before it starts. Earlier this spring, I officially launched the $250 million Building Safer Communities Fund. In partnership with community leaders, we're helping young people to make good choices and to set themselves up for success for life. We'll be accelerating the rollout of this program over the summer. In our efforts, we must be both resolute and realistic. No single bill, including this one, or initiative, will be enough to totally stop gun violence. To ensure that every Canadian feels safe in their community, we must take a comprehensive approach. Banning assault weapons, action at our borders, building safer communities, and today, a new bill. Cumulatively, these efforts mark the most significant efforts at gun reform in a generation. We must fight against the violence that is caused by inaction, indifference, and inequity. We owe it to the survivors, not only who are here with us today, but to everyone who has been impacted by gun violence to do this work and we look forward to doing it. Thank you. Merci, and I will now... And I will now turn it over to Minister Lametti.
Hello, bonjour. Thank you, Marco, for that introduction, and thanks to all of you for joining us today on the traditional territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe. Et en particulier, j'aimerais souligner l'accueil à nos amis qui ont vécu des expériences dans le passé. C'est une obligation de présence pour un Montréalais ici aujourd'hui. Merci. Je veux parler spécifiquement des changements apportés au Code criminel par le projet de loi C-21. Nous savons que pour réduire l'accès aux armes à feu illégales, nous devons réduire le trafic d'armes à nos frontières. Concrètement, les peines maximales pour les infractions de trafic d'armes à feu sont augmentées. Elles passent de 10 à 14 ans. Nous soutenons les services policiers dans leur lutte contre les gangs en permettant l'écoute électronique dans plus d'infractions par l'arme à feu. We are also introducing a new offense of altering a cartridge magazine. Possession of an overcapacity magazine is already a criminal offense because these magazines pose a public safety risk. They enable sustained fire with less frequent reloading. But it is currently not a specific offense to alter a cartridge magazine to exceed the lawful capacity. This new offense will carry a maximum sentence of 5 years in prison. We will also close a gap in the criminal code to extend the prohibition on the import, export, or sale of air guns that look exactly like a conventional regulated firearm, just as lower power replica firearms are already prohibited. These types of guns pose a public safety risk because they are unregulated, widely available, and indistinguishable from conventional regulated firearms. They can be used to commit criminal offenses, and while they are less powerful, they can still cause harm. And because they look the same as real firearms, police need to treat them as if they are real. This has led to tragic consequences. Bill C-21 will work in tandem with our other major law reform bill, Bill C-5, to keep our communities safe and move past the failed criminal justice policies of former Conservative governments. I would now like to invite my colleague, Minister Marcy Ian, the Minister for Women and Gender Equality and Youth, to say a few words. Marcy.
Good afternoon. First and foremost, I want to address you, the survivors, the family members, the activists. It means everything that you're standing here with us today. Thank you. Thank you. Hello. Bonjour. I'm honored to join the Prime Minister and my cabinet colleagues to speak about the steps that we're taking to address the devastating issue of gun violence. My riding, Toronto Centre, is home to some of the highest rates of gun violence in our country. As one local educator said not too long ago, and I quote, "You see community members' kids going through this all the time. Trauma after trauma. It never gets fixed. It never gets to heal properly." But I know my communities, and I know they always find a way to uplift one another, to somehow move beyond the pain. Mothers for Peace helps so much. It's an organization in Toronto. It supports moms who have lost their kids to gun violence. They help people to grieve. They help people to plan funerals and receive continuing support and counseling. In less than just a couple of years, they have grown considerably. And I have to tell you, they wish they hadn't, because their growth represents the loss of loved ones. And it's not just about community organizations coming together. This is about finding solutions to make sure we stop the circle of violence, not just at the municipal level, but federally as well. And when we speak about gun violence, we need to remember that during the pandemic, instances of domestic abuse skyrocketed. And our government acted quickly to provide emergency funding so that women's shelters could keep their doors open. People in women's shelters, the workers there rolled up their sleeves and they kept going because they needed to. They provided life-saving services. We know there's much work to be done before women and children walk through the doors of a shelter. It is about preventing violence from happening in the first place and tackling the root causes of gender-based violence. Some hard facts through the lens of today's announcement. The likelihood that domestic violence will end in death is much, much higher when there is a gun in the house. The data shows us that having access to firearms by an intimate partner increases the likelihood of femicide by 500%. And recently, the Ontario Coroner's Death Review Panel found that 26% of women who are killed by their spouse are killed by firearms. These stats remind us that we need to do so much more to protect women, including those most at risk: Indigenous women, racialized women, trans women, newcomer women. And this bill, this legislation, aims to do exactly that. Thank you so much. Merci beaucoup. I now have the pleasure of turning the microphone over to my colleague and friend, Minister Bill Blair.
Thank you so much, Marcy. Good afternoon, everyone. Bon après-midi, tout le monde. As the Prime Minister has outlined, today Canada is taking some very significant steps forward to keep our communities safe from the devastating impacts of gun violence. And in the long and tragic history of gun violence in this country and around the world, there have not been very many good days. And it's entirely appropriate for us to acknowledge everyone who has felt the tragic loss of a loved one, the loss of their sense of safety and security in their own community, and also to acknowledge their unrelenting advocacy on behalf of increasing safety in their communities. And their advocacy has deepened our resolve in order to respond. And since 2015, we've made some progress in our efforts to keep Canadians safe. We've introduced some common sense gun laws. We've invested in our law enforcement communities. And as Mr. Mendicino indicated, we're investing in kids and communities because those make a difference. And they change the circumstances in our communities that give rise to violence. But we also acknowledge there is still so much more that we must do to address the root causes of gun crime, the conditions in communities that lead to violence, and target the ways in which guns get into the hands of people who will seek to do harm with them. I know from some experience there are three ways in which criminals gain access to firearms. They are smuggled across the border from the United States, which is one of the largest small arms arsenals in the world. They are stolen from legal gun owners, and they are purchased legally by individuals who have a license to make the purchase, but then sold illegally in a process we sometimes refer to as straw purchasing. And we are taking effective steps in Bill C-21 to address all of the ways in which criminals gain access to guns. We also know that there are circumstances where a gun may be owned legally, but the circumstances of its ownership may change. It may be in a home where there is now incidents of gender-based violence and domestic violence. It may be in a situation where a person suffering from suicidal ideation has access to that firearm. Or it may be accessible to somebody who has been radicalized to violent extremism. And in those circumstances, we have to have the tools to enable those firearms to be removed from a situation that is dangerous and made deadly by the presence of a firearm. And in this legislation, we are providing law enforcement and our communities. We are empowering Canadians to take action. In Canada, gun ownership is a privilege, not a right. It's a privilege that is earned by those Canadians who adhere to our strict laws, our regulations, and our requirements regarding licensing, training, storage, and use of a firearm. This is a principle that differentiates Canada from many other countries in the world, notably our colleagues and friends to the south. In Canada, guns are only intended to be used for hunting and sport purposes. And let me also acknowledge, as the Prime Minister has done, the overwhelming majority of firearm owners in this country are law-abiding. They are responsible firearm owners. They acquire their firearms legally. They store them securely. They use them responsibly. They earn the privilege of firearm ownership, and we respect them for their adherence to their laws. And I know a lot of individuals in the firearm owning community in this country, and I can tell you that they are as concerned with the safe use of firearms and restricting the access that criminals and people intent on violent crime can have to firearms. And I believe that they will understand the importance of the work that we are introducing today to keep our communities safe. There are very few good days in the fight against gun violence, but today is a good day. Today is a day when Canada stands up and says, we will not tolerate this level of violence in our communities, and we will take the action that is necessary and that the overwhelming majority of Canadians support to ensure that we restrict the access that those who are intent on violent criminal activity or who may use a firearm to harm themselves or others will have through strong legislation and strong action. And finally, I would like to thank the advocates for their unrelenting pursuit of a safer Canada for all of us. We are inspired by your example. We've been motivated by your advocacy and by the tragedies that you have shared with us. Thank you very much.
Merci. Nous avons maintenant 20 minutes pour des questions avec le Premier ministre et les ministres. Après ça, il va avoir une opportunité de parler avec les familles et les survivants. We now have 20 minutes for questions with the Prime Minister and ministers. There will be an opportunity afterwards to speak with advocates, survivors and families. On va commencer avec la première question, Ray.
Bonjour, Raymond Filion de TVA. Monsieur le Premier ministre, pourquoi un gel sur les armes à feu, les armes de poing, plutôt qu'une interdiction pure et simple d'un océan d'eau?
À partir de la journée que cette législation prend effet, ce ne sera plus possible d'acheter, de vendre, de transférer ou d'importer des armes de poing au Canada. C'est une grande étape. Ça va nous permettre de commencer à réduire le nombre d'armes légaux et illégaux dans ce pays. Je comprends que c'est une étape importante, mais c'est une étape qui respecte aussi le fait que la grande majorité des propriétaires d'armes à feu dans ce pays suivent les lois, suivent les règles.
My colleague would like to have it in English.
As of today, we're passing legislation that, when it is enacted, will make it no longer possible to buy, sell, transfer, or import handguns anywhere in Canada. This is a significant step forward to make our communities safer. It's also a step that is practical, concrete, and real, that respects the fact that the vast majority of gun owners in this country are law-abiding, but will give us more tools to crack down on illegal guns and on the crime that's hitting our communities far too hard from coast to coast to coast.
Vous aviez parlé l'an dernier d'un programme de rachat des armes d'assaut, mais c'est un programme optionnel, n'était pas obligatoire. Est-ce qu'il deviendra obligatoire? Je n'ai pas eu le temps de lire tout votre communiqué, il nous a été donné quelques minutes seulement avant là.
On a promis de mettre en place, on a mis en place des mesures qui rendent illégales les armes d'assaut dans ce pays. C'est maintenant illégal de les acheter, de les vendre, de les transférer ou même de les utiliser. On a aussi promis un programme de rachat pour ces armes d'assaut. Ce programme de rachat sera obligatoire. La seule alternative, si quelqu'un veut vraiment garder leur arme d'assaut, il sera rendu complètement inopérable en tant qu'arme à feu. C'est la seule condition dans laquelle quelqu'un pourra garder une arme d'assaut, c'est qu'il soit complètement inutile en tant qu'arme à feu. C'est une promesse qu'on a faite et ce programme de rachat sera obligatoire pour les armes d'assaut.
Prochaine question.
Good afternoon, Prime Minister. We know many of the guns that are used in violent crime in Canada are illegally sourced from the United States. Beyond tougher penalties for gun smuggling, what concrete tools are you looking at to limit the amount of guns coming across our borders?
As Minister Blair pointed out, there are a number of ways in which illegal guns get to Canada. They are smuggled across from the United States. They are purchased legally and then resold illegally, or they are stolen from illegal gun owners. These measures we're putting forward today crack down on all three of those directions. In terms of gun smuggling, I will say that the investments that we've already made in RCMP and CBSA at our borders has resulted in double the number of illegal guns seized last year as the year before in terms of coming in illegally from the United States. Il y a trois façons que les armes illégales se retrouvent en circulation au Canada. La première chose, c'est qu'ils sont amenés de façon illégale des États-Unis. Deuxièmement, ils sont achetés légalement, mais vendus illégalement à un tiers parti. Troisièmement, ils sont volés d'un propriétaire qui a ces armes de façon légale. À tous ces niveaux-là, les mesures qu'on annonce aujourd'hui vont renforcer pour contrer ces mesures-là. Par rapport au trafic d'armes des États-Unis, on peut dire que les mesures qu'on a déjà prises jusqu'ici nous ont amenés à intercepter plus que le double des armes l'année passée que ce qu'on avait pris l'année d'avant. On va continuer dans cette envolée-là et rendre ça beaucoup plus difficile d'importer ou de trafiquer des armes des États-Unis vers le Canada.
And just going over to the red flag laws, in the previous iterations, advocates were critical of them, saying it put too much onus on people experiencing domestic violence, many of whom don't trust the police or criminal justice system. How do these new red flag laws reconcile some of those concerns that advocates were bringing forward?
Obviously, when it comes to gender-based violence, we've all seen the statistics. The presence of firearms lead to much more tragic outcomes, and that's why we know that red flag laws that have been used in various jurisdictions are a further tool in countering gender-based violence and keeping people safe. We also know that it's an area in which we need to work very closely with advocates and stakeholders, people who've carefully reflected on this, and that's why we were informed in our current framing of the way red flag laws work by the feedback we got from communities that know that, yes, it is an important tool in preventing gender-based violence, but it should not raise the risk level or make even further vulnerable people who are already in vulnerable situations, mostly women.
Prochaine question.
Bonjour, Louis Blouin de Radio-Canada. Il va falloir attendre quand même quelques mois avant que ce gel d'armes de poing n'entre en vigueur. Vous ne croyez pas que d'ici là, les gens se précipitent pour en acheter? Ce n'est pas contraire à l'objectif?
On sait qu'une fois que cette législation sera en place, ce serait plus légal d'acheter, de vendre, de transférer ou d'importer des armes à feu au Canada. Et oui, on espère qu'avec le travail qu'on fera à la Chambre des communes avec les autres partis, on espère pouvoir passer cette législation le plus rapidement possible. Mais si jamais ça prenait trop de temps, on a aussi mis en place des mesures de régulation qui vont s'assurer que ce gel arrivera, même si ce projet de loi tarde dans les coulisses du Parlement.
Je vais vous parler du programme de rachat des armes d'assaut. Il il y a des gens qui pourraient, parce qu'il y a des nouveaux modèles qui sortent, qui sont pas sur votre liste de 1500, il y a des gens qui pourraient prendre le remboursement que vous leur donnez puis s'acheter une nouvelle arme avec. Comment vous allez faire? Est-ce que vous allez changer les critères? Est-ce que vous allez ajouter des armes à mesure? Comment vous allez procéder pour empêcher que d'autres modèles, des nouveaux modèles arrivent sur le marché?
C'est une très bonne question, Louis. Et je dois souligner que oui, on a banni 1500 modèles d'armes de style assaut, mais la réalité, c'est qu'on est rendu à 1800 modèles maintenant bannis. Donc, on va continuer d'en ajouter. Effectivement, il y a une question qui dit, est-ce qu'on devrait être en train de les ajouter une à une chaque fois qu'un nouveau modèle sort, ou est-ce qu'on peut créer des définitions qui vont capter tous les armes à feu impliquées? C'est exactement un point sur lequel on est en train de travailler, mais quelle que soit la façon qu'on va le faire, on va s'assurer que des nouveaux modèles d'armes de style militaire soient quand même illégales au Canada. On a les mesures, on a les moyens de s'assurer qu'il n'y aura plus de vente d'armes d'assaut de style militaire.
Prochaine question.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Premier ministre. J'aimerais savoir comment est-ce que vous allez vérifier la validité et la véracité des permis d'acheteurs potentiels, parce qu'il est très facile aujourd'hui de falsifier un permis.
Une des mesures qu'on a mis de l'avant l'année passée, c'était pour approfondir les vérifications d'antécédents, pour s'assurer que les permis et que les acheteurs d'armes dans le système légal soient vérifiés de la bonne façon. Mais je vais passer la parole à mon ministre qui pourra vous en dire plus à ce niveau-là.
Merci pour la question. Il y a moins que 2 semaines qu'on avait lancé la prochaine étape d'implémentation de le règlement sur le projet de loi C-71. Et avec ce nouveau règlement, il y a plusieurs des obligations avec tous les vendeurs pour garder des records, pour vérifier, pour prendre des étapes pratiques pour vérifier l'identification de qui veulent acheter une arme à feu. Et ça, c'est un exemple concret de la mesure du bon sens. C'est un produit de tout le feedback qu'on a reçu, pas seulement des personnes qui sont ici aujourd'hui, mais même de les chefs de policière. Et avec cette mesure concrète et pratique, on peut mieux protéger tous les Canadiens et les Canadiennes.
Monsieur Mendicino, la deuxième question est aussi pour vous. Ok, très bien. Non, la deuxième question était aussi pour Monsieur Mendicino, excusez-moi. Vous avez mentionné tout à l'heure la prévention auprès des jeunes, notamment les jeunes qui sont impliqués dans des gangs. Est-ce que
dans les
gangs,
oui.
Excusez-moi. Est-ce que ça va impliquer un transfert de fonds en santé aux provinces?
Mais toujours, nous serons là pour travailler ensemble avec les provinces et les territoires. Il y a une bonne collaboration dans les compétences des services policiers qui sont là pour protéger nos communautés. Et aujourd'hui, on a lancé un projet de loi qui a des nouvelles mesures pour adresser les violences causées par les armes à feu et même par les gangs qui utilisent cette arme à feu, avec des nouvelles sanctions sous le code criminel, comme le ministre Lemété a souligné. Il y a plusieurs des autorités pour les services policiers, par exemple dans les contextes de les surveillances de wiretap, qui peuvent prévenir la violence causée par les armes à feu. Mais c'est pas seulement ça. Peut-être la plus importante chose qu'on peut transmettre aujourd'hui est qu'il faut, oui, investir dans nos forces policières, mais en même temps, il faut travailler ensemble avec la communauté pour prévenir la violence dans la première place. Donc, il faut avancer avec les 3 piliers.
Ian Bailey, Globe and Mail. Obviously, my question's for the Prime Minister. Is this handgun freeze an intermediate step towards an outright handgun ban? And if so, when would that happen? If not, exactly why not?
We recognize that the vast majority of gun owners in this country are responsible and follow all necessary laws. We are, however, facing a level of gun violence in our communities that is unacceptable, which is why we are acting. As of the passage of this legislation, it'll be illegal to purchase, to sell, to transfer, to import handguns in this country. And that will give significant tools to reduce the number of handguns in our communities and to protect people from gun violence. This is a concrete and real national measure that will go a long way towards keeping Canadians safe.
On another subject, why has the government not accepted the recommendation in today's Arbor report to move military criminal sexual assault cases to the civilian system, which I understand has been raised previously?
I want to begin by thanking Justice Arbor for her extraordinary work on an issue that matters deeply to all Canadians. Transforming the culture in our armed forces to make sure that our armed forces are worthy of the service and sacrifice of the women and men who choose to step up and serve is a priority for all Canadians. And that's why, as a government, we accept the Arbor report, and quite frankly, we're pleased to be able to announce that we will be immediately moving forward on a third of all those recommendations right away, and we will work very closely and rapidly with stakeholders, with survivor groups, with experts in governance and in military to make sure that we're moving forward in the right way and accepting the report fully.
Rachel, go ahead.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Rachel Haynes from CTV National News. It's been nearly 3 years since the 2019 election when you toured the Danforth and pledged a number of gun and assault rifle changes. However, since then, you've still not banned handguns or implemented a buyback program. How can you guarantee that this is actually the time that your government is going to follow through on these promises?
Actually, it's been almost 2 years since we brought in a ban on handguns. As of a couple of years now, it's illegal to buy, to sell, or to use military-style assault weapons in this country. That's done. That was a massive step that Canada took in the right direction towards keeping people safe. And yes, I recognize that there are political parties out there and politicians who say they will reverse and bring back assault-style weapons, but we will ensure that we continue to keep those weapons banned and indeed have announced an obligatory, mandatory buyback program that will be starting this fall before the end of the year. That's an important step forward on keeping that promise we made to Canadians to strengthen gun control in this country, despite certain other people wanting to loosen gun control in this country. At the same time, you're absolutely right. I made a commitment a couple of years ago that we would move forward on empowering municipalities, big cities devastated by gun crime like Toronto or Montreal or any other community that wanted to ban handguns, to do exactly that. In many discussions with those municipalities, it became clear that they didn't feel like they had the ability or the tools to do that, and it didn't make sense for them. So we then made a commitment in the very last election that we would work with provinces that wanted to ban handguns within their jurisdictions. We'd heard from Quebec, we'd heard from other provinces that said, yes, we want a ban on handguns. So we looked at it with them. And again, it wasn't something that fit just right. But we made a commitment to Canadians that we were going to take real, concrete steps to strengthen gun control and keep families and communities safe, to prevent more people from suffering the terrible grief that far too many Canadians, including people joining us today, have had to suffer. Which is why, as of the passage of this legislation, which we hope will happen very rapidly, but depends on the will of Parliament, as of the passage of this legislation, It will be illegal to buy, sell, transfer, or import handguns anywhere in Canada.
Follow-up?
Thank you. And in the past, you've said that you didn't want a mandatory buyback program after examining New Zealand's program, and the previous bill had made that program optional. So what has changed in the past couple of months that now it is being made mandatory?
We actually made that shift around the 2019 election and campaigned on it. The fact that the buyback for assault weapons would become mandatory because it was clear that even if assault weapons were illegal to use, which is what we brought in when we brought in the assault weapons ban, there was concern that these guns would continue to be out there. Therefore, we're moving forward with a mandatory buyback on assault weapons, which will kick in by the end of this year. And in the situations where someone chooses to keep that weapon, it needs to be permanently and irrevocably disabled by the government or by experts to make sure that it could never again be used as a firearm. Those are the measures that we committed to taking, and that completes the national ban on assault-style weapons.
Next question.
Hi, Prime Minister. Julia Wong, CBC News. Public Safety Canada says legally owned guns, including handguns, are not used in the vast majority of gun crimes in Canada, which you have alluded to. So I wonder what difference this national freeze, particularly on sales and transfers, will actually make to people who are already not playing by the rules.
We have seen far too many tragedies across this country, far too many incidents of gun violence, particularly with handguns, in our streets, in our communities, devastating families, devastating communities from coast to coast to coast, having an extremely high impact of femicide, of gender-based violence, and that's why we're taking action. As of the passage of this legislation, which we hope parties in this House will agree to fast-track, it will be illegal to buy, sell, transfer, or import handguns into this country. We are capping the number of handguns in this country and giving police and border agents more tools to crack down on the illegal importation, theft, and straw purchases of handguns.
Follow-up, Julia?
Yeah, so I typically work in the prairies, and I expect many legal gun owners there are going to say that this legislation is too far-reaching, that it punishes them, that it goes too far generally. How do you respond to them?
People should have the freedom in this country to go to a supermarket, go to a birthday party, walk down the street, play in their yards, gather with families for a picnic without being worried about gun violence. And unfortunately, the reality is, in our country, it is getting worse and has been getting worse over the past years. We need only look south of the border to know that if we do not take action firmly and rapidly, it gets worse and worse and more difficult to counter. That's why, as of this moment, or as of the passage of this legislation, it will be illegal to buy, sell, import, or transfer handguns in this country.
Dernière question, JD.
Oui, bonjour, Monsieur Trudeau. Avez-vous une idée du coût du programme de rachat des armes d'assaut? Combien ça va coûter?
Pour ça, je peux demander au ministre Medicino.
Merci pour la question. Comme je l'ai mentionné dans mes remarques aujourd'hui, on va lancer immédiatement le processus de consultation avec les leaders de l'industrie, eux qui vendent les armes à feu, pour comprendre le paramètre propre pour un système, pour créer un système de compensation, et ça va informer le total coût de le programme de rachat obligatoire. Mais la plus importante chose est le dévouement seront là de le gouvernement de lancer ce programme et de commencer le processus de ramener les armes d'assaut, comme le Premier ministre a dit.
Bravo pour votre français, M. Mendicino. Autre question, vous avez mentionné que, si j'ai bien compris...
Pour lui ou...
Pour vous, à vous encore, oui. Vous avez mentionné qu'il y avait, à chaque année... Il y avait 57 000 handguns qui étaient enregistrés à chaque année.
Chaque année.
Ça veut dire qu'avec l'entrée en vigueur de ça, c'est au moins 50 000 de moins d'armes de poing qui seraient en circulation. Est-ce que vous avez une idée du nombre actuel qui est en circulation au pays, au Canada? Combien de handguns sont en circulation à l'heure actuelle au Canada?
On pense vers 1 million. Donc, pendant la dernière décennie, l'univers a grandi beaucoup au cause de le nombre, le chiffre que vous comprenez. C'est vers 55 000 par année. Donc, ça arrête aujourd'hui. Et ça, c'est la plus importante chose, qu'on capte le marché. Et ça, c'est une de les façons qu'on peut mieux protéger la communauté.
Merci. Ceci met fin à la conférence de presse. That concludes today's press conference.